All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for 5 email templates you need to know to build your business. In real estate, we wear a lot of hats. We are often either in our car at showings or we are communicating with our clients. And once they go under contract, that communication becomes even more important. And as we always say, if there is an email that we are sending more than once, we should ideally be making a template out of it. But where do you start? What do you make sure that you include? How are you saving yourself time and not solely relying on your bandwidth to provide a consistent experience for your clients? That's the power of email templates. And Kelly Evans is a transaction coordinator and agent, so she makes it her whole goal to guide agents and clients alike to the closing table smoothly. She's seen it all. We are going to be learning from her experiences, which is the best way to learn. She's going to talk today about some email templates you can start to use that will really do all of those things for you. So, Kelly, thank you for your time and thank you all for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone's time today. So this is Kate had asked me, could I do 5 email templates? And I can. I actually have 5 really standard templates. I have other templates, but there are 5 standard templates, um, and a list of key points. And like Kate mentioned, I hesitated because I worry that this is too back to basics or a little old school. um, when there are more tools out there that may be more powerful, ChatGPT, et cetera. So just know that I acknowledge that there may be more powerful tools out there, but for today, I'm going to just share my 5 standard templates and some key points that I think are pretty useful for most transactions, and we will get started. So similar to previous presentations, I'm just sharing things I've learned the hard way. And a shout out to our choice partners, Allie and Sterling Law and Open Windows Home Inspections and Brad Davis at the Farm Bureau. I always try to keep this less than an hour. I value your time. So we'll discuss what I narrowed down to key points for 3 templates for buyers and 2 templates for sellers. Someone mentioned yesterday on the call in the chat that they didn't know that Gmail could do templates. And Gmail can't really do templates, but you could save your templates. So this is how I do it. I have used other programs over the years that have, the ability to have email templates. And I've tried them all, but at the end of the day, I just like keeping them in my Gmail because I can manipulate them better. I can make sure the fonts are all even. I can do attachments. I can cut and paste. So this is how I do it. I just have this is my Gmail. I have templates and I put the A at the front of it so that it's the top of my labels. Um, just in case anybody didn't really know how to do that. You can add this little plus sign here. You can add your label and you can move any emails into it. And basically, what I do is I email myself. I work on my templates and I email that template to myself, and then I keep them in this templates. And it looks like this. This is just a snip, but I keep my number 1 template, my number 2, my number 3. I have a utilities email that I continue to send to myself where I have all the Durham utilities and then the Harnett County utilities. And I just keep sending that email to myself and putting it in that templates, and then I can cut and paste all the different utilities areas with all the hyperlinks so that they can and embedded so they can email and click it and go directly to the site wherever they need to go. So I have a lot of other templates. Sometimes I have my templates for, well, there's like mail away script. I get tired of explaining how mail aways work, so I started saving that language and I have that template to myself. And what I also like to point out is, this is February 2026, which means these are fluid. There, there's always something new that pops up that where I say, oh, I need to start adding that to the template because somebody didn't get that and I didn't explain it. So we'll do 3 for buyers and 2 for sellers. So for the buyers, I like to do sort of a right after going under contract welcome, next steps to closing, the utility, kind of that middle of the transaction, and then what to expect at closing. And then for sellers, I have a welcome under contract, and then sort of a prepare for closing. Sometimes that could happen middle towards closing. It kind of depends for sellers when they're, either moving or leaving or they've already left. Um, But for buyers, I do that welcome intro right after going under contract. The next steps would be the utility list. I like to do that right around due diligence expiration if that date matters to that transaction, but after repair negotiations, and then also once the closing date kind of looks solid. And then what to expect at closing, kind of that week of closing. This is a lot of words on one screen, but these are the key points for the welcome intro for buyers. So if nothing else in your template, if you just put these key points, and then you'll remind yourself, I need to mention what to expect from the lender. Um, I like to mention, well, here's what I do. I'll start with that. I start with, may I send these documents to this lender? I like to ask because sometimes they're shopping around. Sometimes we'll add a little blurb about also just a kind reminder not to open any credit or make any large purchases. The lender's telling them that too, but it can't hurt to add that sentence on there. I tell them to begin to do homeowners insurance because that lender's going to ask them for that pretty quickly. And then you can share your preferred vendor list here. I like to mention the closing attorney and what's expected of them. So it's a good reminder that they need to be present at the table for closing. And then if all of a sudden you realize they can't, you've got time to make other arrangements. I also like to make sure that they know they have to have a current ID. Most of the time, the lenders are making sure their IDs are current for their if it's a loan, but it can't hurt to mention that again. I like to mention inspections. Can we help you schedule inspections? And then you can share your list of vendors here too. I like to ask if they want us to order a survey, maybe some dialogue about why it's needed. Um, your property may have noticed that the neighbors just put up a new fence. So you may need to add some language that says, notice the new neighbors just put up a new fence. We may want to go ahead and schedule a survey. Um, and then I like to mention from the very beginning why it may not be ideal to have a moving truck arrive on closing day. A lot of times buyers just think that their closing's at 9 a.m. and they can move in by 10 a.m. And it doesn't work that way. So I like to just sort of mention why it's not ideal, and then they can ask us, why isn't it ideal? We have to move in that day. And then we can at least start that dialogue of, okay, great. That's helpful information that you need to move in that day. We'll make sure we get you the earliest closing time. Um, and then it just sort of prompts us to explain how a real closing date can go down. But I just think it's helpful to mention that from the very beginning so they understand, especially before they start scheduling their movers. And then maybe create a frequently asked questions brochure or a timeline or anything for them to reference that's sort of your brand, it's your voice, um, something that they can reference. That's just an extra tip. So this is what mine looks like generally. Um, I have people ask me a lot, for my templates, and it's sort of like if someone gets their real estate license and they walk up to you and say, "Can you show me how to do real estate?" It's not always that easy. What you're When you're asking for somebody's templates, what you're really saying is, how can I communicate with my client? And it's going to vary. It's going to vary by their personality type. It's going to vary by their needs, their situations. Um, so the key points are helpful, but the language is going to vary and be personalized to your transaction, ideally. But this is just a general one that I may have handy. I'll just leave that up for a second. Any questions on that?
One thing I wanted to chime in real quick, Kelly, just based on personal experience, as you were talking, I was thinking about my email templates, and they were so much longer than this. I was always someone that was like, I need to tell them everything. And at the same time, I maybe I'm speaking from personal experience, but I think a lot of us, when we see a big email, we're like, oh my gosh, and it kind of makes you take a step back. And so a few things to note, like you mentioned, it's great to add a flyer with additional information, or if you've got preferred inspectors or options for them, you can feel free to make that a document that's attached. Another agent in one of her spotlight interviews was mentioning how she has a landing page or a blog post with all of her preferred inspectors that she simply links in her templates. So just something to put some thought to as you're doing it, because looking back, mine were obviously way too long, and so it's a delicate dance of providing them a ton of information, but also not giving them too much where they won't read it. So I love how concise this is and to the point.
Awesome. Yeah, I look at it as a reference point when they're talking to each other in the evening. They're like, wait, how are we supposed to do this? They've got something to go back and reference. Your client's personality type may be that you need to list everything out in bullet points. Um, And if nothing else, these key points are the dialogue points for them to call you the next day while you're stuck in your car all day. You've kind of got a guideline of steps for you guys to discuss together. So it's not everything, but it's key points that could be helpful. And I'll leave that key points up here one more time, just in case. And we'll move on to the second buyer template. I like to send this one right if due diligence date was important or was part of your transaction, then typically right after due diligence, after repair negotiations look good, and also that the closing date looks solid. If there's still some fluctuation in whether or not they're going to close on time or it needs to be extended or the date's going to move, I may pause until we've got that closing date solid. But at a minimum, 10 days to closing because utility companies can sometimes take that long when they require business days. I like to take this minute to remind them to stay in contact with their lender and respond to their requests quickly. If you have a buyer who you know isn't even good at reading your emails, then they're not good at reading the lender's emails. Take a second to see what you're missing in compliance. It's a good time to sort of bug them with anything that's missing. Make sure your compliance file's done. And then this way you're not hitting them up with things that last week of closing when their brain is definitely somewhere else. Talk about the repairs, what those expectations were. Maybe it's we're going to make sure we go back and check this repair, 3 days before closing, or maybe maybe they want to have a reinspection, um, or maybe there were no repairs. And then I like to send them the utility list. Agents, I tell you, if you could put one thing in MLS, it would be the utility list for your listing. That is the one piece that takes so much extra time. I actually wish it was part of the RPODs. I wish they would just put that as part of the RPODs for everyone to fill out. But anyway, try to get that utility list. And then I like to give them page 1 and 12 of the offer to purchase because when they go in to sign up for utilities, it's going to ask them for a deed or a lease. We don't have a deed because we haven't recorded. And I also don't think there's any reason for them to upload a 14-page offer to purchase. So I give them page 1 and page 12 because that's the first page. It's got the seller name and the buyer name. And I've tried to do page 1, and then the utility company comes back and says we need the signature page. So now I send page 12. And then I actually text box over the figures. Again, utility company doesn't need to know what the offer price was, but that's just my little extra perk that I like to put that in there so they're not trying to find the document they need to send for utilities. And then it might be a good time to talk about final walkthrough, what those expectations may be. And then talk again about the closing date, the time, the location, bring their ID. And then I mentioned again, it may not be ideal to have a moving truck arrive on closing day or vendors. So if you know they're having flooring or painting done, um, even internet, just make sure they have a conversation with you about what time, if any, that closing day might work. We we all know that what time we get keys can vary greatly. That's a whole nother class. And this is just a peek at a snip of, sort of a standard um, template. Now, I do have some templates that have emojis in the front of each section. You kind of gear it towards your client type, so you can always jazz these up with emojis or something else, or links to your landing pages, um, or anything else you want to put in there. But these are just basic key points. that prompt you to go, oh yeah, I need to go back and see what those repair expectations were. Any questions on that one? We'll move on to what to expect at closing. So this is for the buyers. This is what to expect at closing. This is typically that week of closing. I like to send a template that mentions what that TRID date would be. That says, because we're closing on a Friday, I might say by Tuesday, your lender is required to give you a copy of the CD to review. I like to mention to them that the lenders don't send us the CDs. If you have a good relationship with that lender, you might, but they're not required to send us the CD. Chances are we may never lay our eyes on the CD. And there's a misconception that we're getting what they're getting, and we're not all the time. I actually like to send a copy of a blank CD and a blank Alta statement so that they understand so that when they see it on closing day or when the attorney sends it to them, it's not the first time they've seen that Alta layout. They've seen the CD a couple times, and then they're like, well, what's this document? And that way they can sort of see a blank version and they won't look so foreign to them when they get those documents before closing, or even sometimes they don't see them until they get sit at the table. Um, I mentioned how the lender is going to balance with the attorney. So while the CD has figures on it, just understand that they're going to next balance with the attorney for things like HOA dues and taxes. So what you received from your lender will vary slightly once the attorney actually puts in true prorated estimates. Sorry, true prorated amounts. The lender had estimates for things like HOA dues and taxes. And this is continued on. I like to set the expectation that final figures may not be ready until the day before closing. If they need them earlier, we can figure that out, but I like to set that expectation that we may not have them until the day before. And that can be really hard for people to wait. There's alternatives. They could send the cash to close amount from their CD and add a little extra if they need a longer window of time to wire their money. I mentioned that most attorneys require wires. There are still some attorneys out there that will let them bring a check, but they're few and far between now. So I like to prepare them. They're going to have to wire and to have a conversation with their bank institution or their retirement account, or figure out now, is this going to happen within 24 hours? Does this happen right away? Is there a 5-day waiting period? All of those things have happened to me. I like to mention again that they need to be present at the table, ideally for an hour, just so that they need to plan their work schedule, bring their photo ID. And then I mention closing date expectations, that it can take time to record. It's not ideal to have a moving truck arrive on closing day. And then I like to tell them, congratulations, you're a new homeowner. Any questions on the buyer side? All right, we will move on to sellers. This is welcome under contract, right after going under contract. I like to talk about what those due diligence fund expectations are. Maybe it was Venmo, maybe it was Zelle, maybe it's a check that's under their, doormat. Remind them they need to deposit it. I've had clients before that hold on to that check thinking they're gonna like cash or to spend it later. And I've realized now I need to tell them you need to deposit that because it needs to clear the buyer's account for the lender's satisfaction. I like to tell sellers how to prepare for inspections. It'd be nice if we know the day. This is the day, and maybe give them a little information on how to prepare if they're living there. If it's vacant, so much easier. I like to tell them if they do live there that it is kind to vacant for the inspection. A lot of agents don't think to tell their sellers that. They don't have to. It's their home. They can be there. But if they're going to be there, we like to tell everybody they're going to be there. I like to tell them that it's probably the last time those buyers will be in that home until closing day. And it helps if they can speak freely with their inspector, and it's their moment. It's their one moment in the home. but they're not required to leave. Maybe a blurb about what to expect after inspections. Um, I tell them that they're to expect an appraisal visit and that they don't have to leave for the appraiser. And if there's been a lot of home updates, maybe leave a sheet. The appraiser would be glad to look at anything that's been left on the counter that might have the list of updates. If they recently put a new roof or HVAC, even the receipt that shows the amount can be helpful too. I like to tell them there'll be a survey visit so that they won't be alarmed if they see people walking around their backyard one day. And then I mentioned to them, this is the closing date, this is the attorney. While sellers don't have to attend closing, there are documents they have to hand sign. So I like to make sure that they let me know, are you going to be here the week of closing? If you're not, then let's work on some alternatives now while we have some time. And then maybe a frequently asked questions brochure that's your brand and your voice also could be helpful for sellers. Are there questions coming in on the chat that I'm missing?
Yeah, but they're just associated with Google
Okay.
templates, so I'm responding.
Okay.
You're good.
Awesome. I never realized how hard it is to see the chat when you're the presenter. And continued with the seller welcome. This is my important extra tips. So I'm going to leave this up here and then I'll go through each one because these are all things that seem to have I've learned the hard way with sellers. I like to tell them how property taxes work, how they're going to pay for their portion based on the calendar time that they lived in the home, regardless of how taxes are collected July to June. I like to mention HOA dues and that we do our best to determine those fees, but that it's likely your HOA is going to charge for things like HomeWise docs and transfer fees. And those fees range, they range. Yet it's always so hard to determine those fees. And then I like to mention that mortgage payoff, they're going to collect 4 to 7 days of interest. They have that payoff amount they're looking at on their phone or they're, you know, online and they're like, well, they're collecting, why is the attorney collecting more than what it says I owe? And that's what that is. So this is a welcome snip for sellers. Again, I just sort of and you can jazz these up, put emojis, but this is just my key point so that it prompts me to add whatever language should go in this section. So I'll leave that up for just a sec. For the preparing for inspections, I like to remind them all the utilities have to be connected, crawl space, storage, attic doors unlocked, accessibility to the electrical panel and the water heater, especially if you have sellers who have loaded up their garage. It's likely they may have blocked the water heater and the electrical panel. So that's just a little snip of one of the templates, just very basic. So a note about property taxes. We probably don't need to spend too much time on it, but this is the dialogue. This is what I write. I let them know that taxes are paid on an annual, how do I have it? I can't see it there. Annual proration based on the calendar year per the offer to purchase. I let them know they're going to collect the days that they occupied the home. We nor the closing attorney can change this because if you've been at a table with sellers who are very confused about this, it gets ugly. Because sellers don't always trust the attorney because the attorney works technically is representing the buyer. So it's nice if you get ahead of some of this and go, yeah, remember I mentioned this on your email, this on the your welcome email, this is standard practice. And then they'll trust it a little more. Same with HOA dues, just as mentioned. We do our best to disclose the fees. You know, it's their HOA. They're currently the client of the HOA. They can call the HOA and try to get more information. They'll probably get better information than we do. But nobody gets better information than that attorney when they order that transfer. And then all of a sudden, all these fees start showing up. And same with the mortgage payoff. Just go ahead and get ahead of it. Let them know they're going to collect a couple days interest and that they'll likely get that back in their escrow payment with the tax and interest that's in insurance that's in escrow. And this is the little snip. It's just sort of an extra important notes. It's everything that I just showed, but and they may not pay attention, but at least you can say you tried to mention these things ahead of time. Or if nothing else, it starts the conversation. Hey, what did you mean by this? What did you mean by the property taxes? And then you've got some time to discuss it with them well before you're sitting at that table or well before the day before closing. And then number 5. So this is sellers preparing for closing. So this is maybe 10 to 14 days before closing. Negotiations look good. Closing date looks good. I also sometimes like to add seller form 170. It is in dot loop. They created about 2 years ago. I like it. It can be a good piece to send at this point for your sellers. I like to remind them of the personal property that they agreed to. Maybe mention fixtures again. If you've got just to make sure, you may have already gone over it when you did your listing agreement and when you went under contract. But if you think they need a little extra reminders on what are fixtures, this is a good time. If there were any repairs, talk about collecting receipts. Then you can mention your plans for destaging and removing the lockbox, sign removal, etc. Talk about the appointment they have for their seller docs, whether they've moved away and there's plans for them to handle all that remotely and overnight the documents back. But take a minute to figure out how your sellers are going to sign their documents. I like to set the expectation that the Alta statement may not be prepared until that day before closing. And let's see here, buyers. I mentioned how the buyer sits at the table, then the lender funds, the attorney will record, so this could take several hours. And then I'll mention to them that we'll let them know when their proceeds are on the way. And then these are friendly reminders that I also list. Disconnect the utilities for the day after the closing date. What did I put here? Oh, the temp. So this was something I now add to my templates is for them to keep their home at a reasonable temperature. If they have moved away in the wintertime and they turn off their heat, not okay. So we've learned to sort of mention please keep your home at a relatively reasonable and they may not know what relatively you may need to just say, could you please just keep your temperature at a minimum of, 62 degrees in the winter and whatever, 76 in the summer or something like that. Um, Tell them they're going to need to unpair those devices. The Ring cameras, the Ring doorbells cameras, they can't spy on the buyers after they move in. And then mention to them, start forwarding your mail to your new address, your shopping accounts. Mention to clean the home as if you were the buyer. How would you like to find it? While it only needs to be in broom swept condition, um, I like to say kindly leave the home as if you would like to find it if you were the buyer. And then trash. So this is the new one, a newer one. Um, Making sure that they understand they can't leave piles of trash on the curb. Not only that, they can't leave, it's best if they don't leave the trash can full and load it up when trash isn't picked up for another week because the buyers need that trash can when they move in. So we've learned to sort of mention if you could please make sure the trash can is also empty by closing day. That's helpful. We get all those things don't always happen, but um, sometimes it's things they don't think about, and maybe this would help them realize, oh my gosh, let's get all this out before this last trash pickup. It'll be a courtesy to the buyers to not have it full when they move in. Mention that they can leave their appliance manuals, leave them in one kitchen drawer. Talk about the final walkthrough. I think it's a good practice to maybe mention to clients that if they could ideally vacate by 5 p.m. the evening before, they don't have to, but if you think that's necessary for a particular client, I think that's a good threshold to mention. Mention for them to leave their keys, pool keys, mail keys, garage door openers. People drive away with their garage door openers all the time. And then mention that we will usually give them, the buyers will usually get the key from the lockbox. I think that's it on this one. Does anyone have any questions on that? I will just do a quick best practice is to put your address on the subject line. It helps you, it helps the attorney, it helps the lender, it helps people on the other side, it helps everyone if you can just, and because when you or your client are referencing back, you want to be able to just type in that address and get all the email correspondence that you had. And someone mentioned yesterday they didn't know how to change the subject. So I thought I'd put a little snip here. So put the address in the subject line at all possible, even add it. If it's a new builder and they've got lot 49, maybe really quickly before you continue that thread, you change the subject line with the address, and then that will continue on the thread going forward. But this is how you do it. When you do a reply, there's a little box right here, and you can click this drop down and you can click reply forward, and then you can click edit subject. And then my quick last words are that these templates are meant to educate, set expectations. It's nice if you've answered their questions before they've even asked. You can have generic templates with those key points if you're real short on time, even if it just, these are the key points and let's have a conversation tomorrow. You can just say, I wish I could make this more personalized, but I want to mention these couple of things. Let's make sure to, speak tomorrow. And then you could work on your own frequently asked questions brochure or a contract to close brochure, something in your brand and your voice. And then remember to thank your clients for all their hard work. Um, we tend to get we forget how hard they're working. They're doing their regular 9 to 5 job and they're trying to run their life, and we're adding all this extra work um, onto their day to day. So that's just my last piece to say thank you to clients. And I believe that is it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kelly. There was so much info in there. I had no idea you could change the subject line. Obviously, Fatima put in the chat, and I quite agree. Obviously, if it's new construction, the builders do like to see the lot number in there. So if you edit it, and just note to people like include that lot number and then put the address after it. And
Exactly.
I love all of that. I'm gonna pop into the chat real quick. In the meantime, was there anything that anyone wanted to share? Anything that stood out? Anything that you don't include and you're going to start including, or something that we might have missed? Obviously, these are just jumping off points, and there's a million other templates and emails that get sent in a transaction. But curious how this landed for you guys. Anyone want to share anything?
Hey there. Just I wanted to just say I love this, and I don't know why I haven't done this before. I just constantly recreate things over and over, I guess just to make my life miserable. so- but I'm definitely going to, start doing this moving forward to make my life easier. And I will say one thing that I feel like has been coming up more and more again is like technology, so like from the buyers and from the sellers, right around closing, it's like you've got all these fancy, cameras and Nest thermostats and things that need apps and things that the Ring doorbell that you have to then change into your name. And I don't know. I've had clients who get super frustrated because they're getting all these high tech gadgets, but then they're just kind of left hanging at closing and don't know what to do. So I would definitely, add that along with like utilities somewhere around that same timeline, all the tech gadgets so that the buyers can kind of be prepared for that transition.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. You're right. Even when you're just saying, all the appliance manuals can also say, can you leave out, any instructions on how to, reset some of these amazing gadgets. I love that. Yep, good point.
I ran into that too when I was closing on my home, transferring a Yale lock. Unfortunately, you would think that they would have something set up, but for some reason, there's not really a seamless way to do that. You kind of have to really be tight with the buyer and seller and say, "Hey, here's how we're going to do it."
Yeah,
Other
I
things
had
that
I had a situation where I had a closing back in like September, and my guy had set up like smart Christmas lights on the house. So sure enough, in December, I'm getting this call on like, how do I set up the lights? Like what? And of course, there's like an app, but I should have gotten all of that stuff squared away in like August. But anyways, just
you
It's
learn
always
from every
something.
transaction for
That
sure.
that's right. It's always something. And that's also my point is that these templates are fluid even for me. Even 12 years doing this, I change them often. I add to them or, something in real estate forces us to, change the language for whatever reason. So I'll always feel like it's okay to, to change these as you go. It's good
One
to have guidelines, but it can change.
Yeah. One thing that stood out when you were talking about changing the power, that was another thing I'd experienced of um, switching power for a few days and then not have gone over to the property until then and realizing there was a lapse. And in that amount of time, like all of the ice from the freezer had frozen and come out of the ice maker. And you're like, oh, now there's water all over the floor of my brand new home, right? But you learn from everything. One thing that I'm a huge fan of on a separate note, and obviously this isn't something I would include in any of the templates that you did, it would be its own email, but I love Loom as a software. I have that as a screen sharing program. It's similar to Zoom, but you just click one button and it records your screen. You can have your camera on, you can have it off, but I will do that for reviewing their CD or Alta, and I will do that for every buyer and seller and say, hey, like you'll go over this with your lender. You will also go over it with the attorney at closing, but just so you've heard it from me, let's go everything that you're seeing currently. And I'll show them where their deposits are and where those credits are. I'll also use that as another time to double down, like you said, Kelly, on the HOA transfers and things that they are quote unquote paying for twice and just re-explain to them you will get a check for your escrows after closing. I know it's counterintuitive, but just know that's why you're being charged, that it's not something that's overlooked. So if you already have your templates, that's something I would definitely recommend because it just is an added level of service and it's so much easier to do than trying to go over a CD on the phone. It's like hoping people are looking at the same lines you are. So awesome. Well, thank you guys. Anyone else have anything else they want to share?
Yeah, I just want to quickly say I did the Loom idea with my buyer the other day, and they were quite impressed. I made my looks like tech savvy person or something like that. Anyway, but yeah, you're so right about actually seeing the CD in front of you and going over line by line, and also it works as sort of evidence, like, hey, I went over this, and here's the video that I sent to you. So I think that's a good idea, actually. And having a template is awesome. I don't know why I haven't done so yet. Um, maybe because I don't have volume. I don't know. But it not only save your time, but also avoid a situation where I'm like, oh shoot, how did I miss this? For example, like explaining DD or something like that. It works like a checklist too, and yeah, and to save your time. So that's great. Thanks for sharing.
That's right. Keeps you out of trouble. But what you said about volume, do it now while you've got the time. Like,
That
you
is so
know,
true. Yeah,
yeah, don't wait until you have volume.
exactly.
And the only other thing I thought I might mention, does anyone understand why we ask sellers to disconnect their utilities for at the day after closing? Is that kind of everyone understands why, or are people confused by that? I'll really quickly just mention why. Um, the language on the offer to purchase says that sellers have to keep utilities through closing date. So or closing time, and we don't know what time it's going to close. So they need to keep it on for that closing day. If the buyers forget to connect, like if this is just the way I try to explain to sellers when they get upset about it. Well, why do I have to disconnect for the day after closing? And I usually I say this. That day of closing, it's still your home, it's still your homeowner's insurance. And if something, if we don't close, it's still your responsibility to keep those utilities going. If the buyers forget to connect, you don't want that disconnection to happen at noon before we've recorded. And like Kate mentioned, all the ice melt from the freezer and gets onto the floor, or it's 30 degrees outside and there's no electricity. So I try to tell them, pay that extra day. I know it feels like you shouldn't, but you should, because if you don't, you run the risk of anything that catastrophic that can happen when you don't have utilities on, when you don't have electricity.
Yeah, it all falls on them.
Yeah,
It does. I've had some bad experiences.
on a close, the day before closing, I forgot to set up a final walkthrough. That hurts so much. Since then, I said, I need a checklist for what to do on every step of the purchase. So that's when I started, I have a checklist for every client and I put on the outside of the file and I keep checking as I go. But this was very helpful. I've learned a few things. I'm gonna add some of those to my checklist.
Yay!
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you guys. I'm grateful for the time. Thank you.
Yeah. And like I mentioned, as long as Kelly's cool with it, we'll be sure to send out a copy of the slides. In that same email, I'll be sure to include in Suite Assist. We have a couple of email templates that you can use as jumping off points as well on the buy side. But as always, we love being in community with you guys. So if you have a stellar template that you would like to share, as long as it's not one that you've purchased and agreed that you can't share it, right? But if you have one that you've created that feels really fail-proof and you would love to put it out there to our community, send it my way and I'll be sure to get that uploaded to Suite Assist as well. But thank you guys so much for your time today. Kelly, thank you so much as well. Marilyn, did you have a question before we go?
I
Or a comment?
did. Just a really quick question. I probably should know this, but what is the basic difference between the CD and the Ulta? So the Ulta is the final one that the attorney is going over, and there might be a couple of days difference in the interim interest for taxes and insurance. Is that it, basically?
No. So the CD is closing disclosure, one for the buyer, and then there's a closing
Hmm.
disclosure, one for the seller.
Hmm.
Because we used to have a HUD statement where all the figures were on one document. So in 2018, when TRID rules, they had to separate separate the two. So the buyers got their own closing disclosure and the sellers got their own closing disclosure. But then what happened is we all still needed to look at figures on the other side sometimes, home warranty purchase, commission. So the attorneys here most of the attorneys started using the Alta statement. And that
Hmm.
combines the two. So the Alta has the buyer side on the right-hand side and the sellers on the left-hand side. It's all the same figures as the final CD
Hmm.
for the buyer. So the buyer's final CD from their lender will eventually, um, they may not create a final CD. There may be just the prelim CD, and then the attorney will create that Alta statement balancing back and they'll balance with the true HOA fees, the true prorated taxes to date. Maybe add the survey charge, anything else that may be a buyer expense that the lender missed.
Okay.
Oh,
So
okay, go
More,
ahead.
I was going to say more inclusive of anything that can come up.
The Alta has the seller charges on it. The
Yeah,
buyer
and
CD
both.
has no seller charges on it.
That's right. So it's both of them all on one sheet. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind
So,
of like a balancing spreadsheet. So
Yes.
you'll see your due diligence, for instance, and on the buy side, it'll say a debit, and on the seller, that same line on the seller side, it will say a credit, right? And so
That's right.
it kind
That's
of
right.
goes through that way, whereas your CD is specific to each side. And then obviously for the buy side, if you have a loan, it'll include like, the terms of that loan as well, like your interest rate and stuff.
Makes a
and
lot of sense.
I believe the CD should be delivered to the buyer at least 24 hours before closing, right?
3 days.
3 days.
Oh, 3 days. So how about the altar? What's the rule about delivering altar?
No rule.
At close,
Oh, okay.
it's at closing usually.
Yes, and we'd like to see it 2 to 3 days before closing, but it doesn't always happen, so don't promise it.
Yeah, I had lenders delivering the altar, like the CD the day before closing.
It happens. I mean, chances are that that buyer acknowledged review of that CD 3 days before. You may not have seen it, nor had it been sent to the attorney. So sometimes what happens is the closing department for the buyers, for the lender, is doing what they're supposed to do. I'm letting you acknowledge this 3 days before. That's the rule. But that window of time from there to the attorney can really vary. It could be an overworked, understaffed closing department that hasn't had a chance to balance with the attorney yet. And yeah, sometimes that doesn't happen until the day before and the night before, and that frustrates the attorneys. And then we're the ones begging our attorneys for copies of these Altas and CDs, and most of the time it's truly out of their control.
I see. So the buyer won't see the altar until the day of closing.
If the lender has sent the CD within that, a nice amount of time and the
Oh,
attorney
okay.
has time to prepare it, the attorney
Mhm.
will send it to us the minute they have it prepared.
Got it.
But
Thank
again, it could be the end of the month, it could be a Friday, there's all those little variations too that keep us from really promising anything to our clients.
thank you.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much. We'll be sure to get this recording out to everyone. Kelly, thank you again for always sharing your knowledge with us and being an open book. We so appreciate you as a resource. Thank you all for your time today. Make it a great day. Go out in the world, do your thing. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Thanks.